Hi everyone and welcome to my Shadow Cascade Bladedancer build guide. This is my favorite build in Last Epoch. I have played a lot of Rogue with the Falconer lately. I have done some other stuff on the Warlock, on the Beastmaster, etc. But in fact this is the first build I've ever made in Last Epoch, like 3 years ago. So I decided to go back and actually finish that character, and I've grinded it all the way to level 98 now, and I wanted to go a bit further before I make this video, but ultimately it doesn't really seem to matter, and I just have so much fun playing this. So there is like the typical like Shadow Dagger Bladedancer stuff where you throw like umbral blades and then you have those spinning things and you stack those Shadow Daggers and stuff goes kaboom basically. And there is this. So you use a synchronized strike, which is like this combo attack. You like jump forward and produce 4 shadows, and then you use Shadow Cascade to finish, and every single one of your shadows produces another Shadow Cascade, and you have like an insane AoE burst all around you. The playstyle is really fun. It has this 2-button setup, but otherwise nothing else. You can see my skill bar here right now. I have triple shift because I actually have 2 different abilities that I just trigger, which is one of the shurikens for like some extra defensive buffs and some shred. And then there's the umbral blades that also trigger sometimes with those spinning blades, just applying a bit of like on hit effects like shred, etc. and some chill. Nothing really major. And it's a very simple, very fun build, and I'll show you what it's all about. I also have the full Last Epoch planner from Maxroll here that I'm going to go into, and I have a loot filter for you guys that works from level 1 to 100 without any adjustments needed. I didn't really push this build too far just yet because, as I mentioned, I was still leveling up, I was still like min-maxing it and all that, and I also had to kind of fix a lot of the old gear that I was still wearing from 3 years ago. So my gear is kind of in bad shape, but I managed to kind of like fix most of these issues, and I was going up in corruption quite easily. So I didn't go that far, but I managed to do like something like 200 something corruption, no problem at all. I'm basically one tapping everything, and boss fights are, I don't know, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, something like that. So this can definitely go way higher with corruption, especially once you start setting up a bit more defenses, which I couldn't really get going that much. But even so, with the 2k life, if you're a bit careful, you can survive just fine. Ultimately, you want to be a bit tankier than that, and this planner that I made here, I actually went up to 4000 life. You can stack a lot of life even on the rogue, and you're gonna be just fine. There's gonna be a lot of armor in this, so this build is gonna have something like 60% armor mitigation or so. This is not including all of the temporary buffs you can have here, for example. And well, you can have a lot of damage output as well. Like a single one of these Shadow Cascades here can crit for upwards of 50k or so on my character currently. So sometimes this a single combo can do something like 100, 200k or even more damage all at once. And you can basically do this like once every 2 seconds or something like that. And like this, you can also start stacking up a bit of like armor shred and actually push your damage even higher. So as long as you can kind of like dance around the boss, you can get more and more damage and just burst him down really fast. You have to know that this is a very mana hungry build, so we are actually investing quite a lot into mana. In particular, we have mana regeneration on 3 items. You want to try to hit something like around 100% or so extra mana regeneration, which you can do with 3 tier 5 rolls, like this one here, for example. So ring, belt is usually the way. And we have a bunch of extra mana recovery here from shifting. So you want to shift as much as possible, which also makes cooldown reduction kind of nice. And we also have extra mana recovery here from the umbral blades. So basically, those shadows leave behind those spinning blades. And compared to the Shadow Dagger build, they're not really like killing stuff. But as I mentioned, they have this chill effect, and they also give us mana here. So when you dash or when you shift, you also gain mana back from the recall. So you have like a better mana recovery. That's something that I've been trying out and actually works like a charm. Other than that, this build actually works from fairly early on, and actually if you have way too much mana issues at the start, you can just not spec this node here. This one gives you plus 100% mana cost for your synchronized strike, but you get 2 extra shadows, so it effectively you get 5 hits instead of 3 hits. And well, your own hit doesn't really matter all that much. It's mostly your shadows doing the work here. So it does cut into your damage quite a lot not running this node, especially because it also it doesn't allow you to run Careful Assault that easily here. So you'd also have to take out 2 points here to get like this number of shadows 2 instead of 4, and then they do less damage. So you really want to try to get that mana online as early as possible so they can go for the 4 shadows per synchronized strike, and then do like the full combo, and it also gives you a better AoE coverage and everything. Outside of this though, there's not really all too much crazy stuff you're really going for. It's mostly stacking a lot of crit. You want to try to reach 50% crit chance because Shadow Cascade has a hidden double crit chance bonus for whatever reason. Instead of 5% base crit, it has 10%, and it just scales all the crit times 2 basically. So this means you have to hit like 50% crit chance. So you can see right now at 48. And sometimes I have like a temporary buff that puts it over 50. And if you have 50% melee crit chance, that is enough to always crit with this build. So that's kind of like a little perk of Shadow Cascade. So it is fairly easy to reach. And in my planner, I actually like overshoot it a little bit. So just in case you are going for exactly this, you might be able to like, drop maybe some points from your passives, or maybe drop one of the crit rolls or something like that. It's just kind of like showing here in the planner the kind of like juicy and really good rolls they want to try to have in every slot. And of course, to get out the crit chance, you want to start stacking critical multiplier. So we have this here on the amulet, for example. There's something like here on the relic. We have the katanas, which have a lot of crit multi. There's also a bunch of stuff on the passive tree. And you can reach something like 400, 500% crit multi or so. You can see this here. You're going to do a lot of damage. And all of the remaining stats are basically just defense, a lot of health. So we have some, for example, something like this here, hybrid health, percent health on the belt. And you want to try to get hybrid health here, wherever you can, basically, percent health wherever you can. A bit of armor and reduced damage taken from crits, for example. You have to see on the chest. There's a lot of glancing blow in this build. So I have this chest here as well for the 15% extra glancing blow. If you can get that one, it's like the best base. It's pretty crazy. And there's a lot of glancing blow on the passive tree as well. So most of the time you'll actually get this 35% damage reduction from glancing blow, and you can actually get to 100% chance with a few dust shrouds, and you can get those also from the passive tree. So this makes it also much safer. And then once you reach something like 3k plus life, I don't expect it to reach 4k, but this planner has 4k. If you look at this here, if you have like the absolute juicy idols with a lot of life rolls, for example, well, then you are actually fairly tanky at this. Offensively, in addition to trying to get this 100% crit chance and a lot of crit multi, you can also stack this increased damage with Shadow Cascade per active shadow stat. So you see this here on the helm, for example. This is like a class-specific roll, and also on the chest. And those two rolls are really like your main damage boost in addition to the crit. You can get a lot of like additive, like increased damage basically. So if you have 4 shadows, you get 4 times this bonus. So it's 180% just on a chest here, for example. Kind of same story here. You can have like almost 400% increased damage just from those 2 rolls already. And there is more stuff like this as well, like extra damage for skills used by shadows. And yeah, there's like, a bunch of other like increased melee damage modifiers you can get in certain places. But in terms of the increased damage modifiers, those 2 rolls are really what you're looking for and where you get most out of it. So you want to try to get those on your chest. In addition to the Shadow Cascade ranks, they're also pretty big. If you can get this on an Exalted roll, like a +3 or even +4 on the good chest base, you really want to hold on to that, because this is your main skill and there are a lot of really good points. Now let's talk about the skills a little bit. So here's a Shadow Cascade tree. You can also always look at the slider here. Down here on the max soul planner, we have the slider for the progression. So I actually put them in the right order of how you want to spec this. It might not be that great at like the early levels, like when you're, I don't know, level 20 or so, but as soon as you have Synchronized Strike and a bit of mana, it should feel just fine going through the campaign already. And then as you get more and more stuff online, it will be pretty good. So this setup definitely works from relatively early on, as long as you can get this mana issue under control, basically. But talking about the Shadow Cascade, we have this Careful Assault node here. This is very important. So I'm actually going to show this in-game. So we have this here. So this is 100% multiplicative damage when you have exactly 4 shadows. And a Synchronized Strike gives you exactly those 4. And as I mentioned, if you don't have the mana, then you might want to go for 2. And then obviously you have to change this as well. Outside of that, we get a lot of mana back as well. There's mana refund, and there's also mana gain per shadow. So when you have those 4 shadows active and then your Shadow Cascade, you actually refund 24 mana. That's a lot of mana. And this also helps you to like fuel the engine a bit. And then we have this stuff up here, the Crushing Darkness, that makes it so that you don't scale with attack speed, but instead you get extra damage. And you can also scale your attack speed into more additional damage as well. So this is here the leveraged momentum. So at least later on when you have more points and actually more sources of attack speed, you can actually spec into this, and then per 1% attack speed you get 0.6 damage. So it means when you have 100% increased attack speed bonus, you get 6% multiplier on your damage for Shadow Cascade. So this is really powerful and gives you like those big juicy crits later on. There's also like some other really strong stuff like the flow state, extra damage here, multiplier. We also have this here, damage per shadow, kind of synergizes with the whole setup with the 4 shadows. So there's a lot of really powerful stuff, and then we have the extra area here. And if you don't have those extra ranks, you see this is a rank 23 Shadow Cascade, then you have to leave out either leverage momentum for the attack speed scaling or a bit of area. But I really suggest to keep the area because it just allows you to overlap on bosses much easier and just gives you better clear and much faster clear. And usually the damage is fine, especially early on. You have so much damage to this build that you can probably just leave out this until you get those extra Shadow Cascade ranks. Next up we have the shift here. So shift is just generally nice to go fast. There are two main things to trigger here. Number one is the dancing shadows. So this allows you to trigger a Shadow Cascade by just shifting. So that's your main skill. It doesn't do that much damage because it doesn't have this shadow synergy in that case, but it's still a bit of extra damage. Sometimes you shift into a pack and the pack just explodes and you don't actually have to attack. So it's kind of nice to have this. Then we have the mana, as I mentioned. There's also stuff like invulnerability while shifting. I also have like 1 point here in the dodge, for example, just gives you like extra defense. And we have the shurikens here. So you might wonder, why do we have the shurikens? Well, this is because later on, at least as the last spec here, you can get this shuriken shield. So we have this here, where you get a blade shield for 3 seconds and a shuriken circle around you. So you can see this here, you have like the spinning things. And this gives you a lot of armor. You get 30% armor per shuriken. So you get 5 shurikens, that's 150% armor bonus. And you can also extend the duration here, so it lasts like 4.5 seconds. And you can get some stuff like a bit of physical rest shred if you're like nearby an enemy, like a boss for example. If you just dance around the boss, he's gonna shred the phys rest like this. It's just really nice. And he has like a PS chance and all that. So this is basically what comes online kind of late. Once you're like level 60 or so maybe, or so, you have like this blade shield. Before that, you could do pretty much anything. You could do like a smoke bomb, or you can do a decoy or something. But again, these are kind of mana hungry things, and you don't really want to waste more mana on other stuff. This build is already pretty hungry. So just proccing these shurikens is nice, and you can see this in my armor here right now. I have 32%, for example, and now doing this I go up to 48% armor. So for physical damage, this is like another, nearly 20% damage reduction or so from where I was. And even for other elements, it's still like, it's 10% less damage taken or something like that. So this is pretty powerful, especially if you have a bit of flat armor. This scales up your armor really highly. So it just makes the build overall more durable and easier to play. And last but not least, we also have this extra movement speed buff from Shift. So you get 50% extra movement speed. That is not just a haste buff, this is like an extra buff basically, in addition to, for example, haste and all the other movement speed you have. So you actually go really fast, and this makes this build feel really fluid. And if you get the cooldown down quite a lot, like for example here, see you have a 2.5 seconds cooldown. It's not even perfect, but you can get this down to like 2.2 or something. You have this buff basically up all the time. You get this mana back all the time. You're gonna proc your shurikens all the time. You get this dodge buff here, and Shift just feels really nice like this. And speaking of cooldown reduction, you can see this here, for example, there's like a pair of boots that I have. If you can get like cooldown reduction here, and then maybe extra cooldown reduction roll on your belt or so, and like an opal ring, you can get something like plus 40, plus 50% cooldown recovery speed. And I think the base cooldown of Shift is something like 3.5 seconds or so. You can actually get this down to like almost down to 2 seconds or something. So it goes really fast at that point. Here's the tree for the synchronized strike. So this is something that you want to get online quite early. And most importantly, we have the mana efficiency here. So this just helps you out, making it much easier to sustain the mana. There's the extra 2 shadows here. So once you have the mana figured out, you're going to use this. And there's also this extra damage for your shadows. So you see this here, plus 200% increased damage yet again. So I talked about the mods on the chest and the helm. You have this as well. You have a lot of increased damage on this build just by default. So you don't really stack like melee and physical and all that. We mostly just like flat and crit, and the rest comes from, those few sources basically. This is one of them. We also get a lot of healing here. Shadow Rush is kind of nice. And well, the other points are pretty much irrelevant, but we have this extra 25% attack speed here. So especially once we have this node here with the leverage momentum, you can actually synchronize strike and you get more attack speed basically. So this extra attack speed also scales your damage right now. I can't show this because there's no target, but if you hit a target, then you also get this buff here, and you have even more damage output. And lastly, we have the Umbral Blades here. So this is kind of like an unusual tree, but again, as I mentioned at the start, this is mostly just a support skill, basically. So we have these spinning blades, and we drop those spinning blades from the shadows, and those spinning blades give us the chill. So we have chill, which is kind of nice. You don't have to roll on your items, and you proc it very easily. You can also just like proc other effects from those hits. And we also get the mana back here, most importantly. So you have this here, the Nightmare Dash. You get 2 mana recovered per blade. It does help a little bit and just makes it more smooth. I couldn't really find anything else to put here as kind of like a somewhat passive bonus. So I went with Umbral Blades, and this has worked relatively well so far. You can also proc haste more reliably. So basically, every time you do this combo here, you have these spinning blades, and then you shift, and then those blades get pulled to you, basically. And on their way back, if you hit something, then you get this mana, and you also get the chance for a haste. So it's just like a nice combo here, and that is like a bit of an extra bonus. Now let's talk about the passives real quick. You got start out here with the rogue standard passives, so a lot of like added physical damage here. In general, we're gonna stack physical damage on our weapons. We have the flat physical here, flat physical there. Why physical? Well, it's just like the easiest to kind of scale, so you can maybe get a bit of like physical penetration, for example. I have an amulet like this here, but it's not too important to only stack physical. So if you really can't get a weapon that doesn't have physical damage, well, you can also go with something else. But generally, you have the most synergies and the easiest synergies on physical, I would say. So you want to try to get this. But other than that, well, we have the haste stuff here, the damage taken reduction while moving. So always want to try to run around. So don't just like stand here and, wait for your mana, but at the very least, you can just hold down left click and run around. You get a 20% damage reduction here. We have the chance on for haste on hit. It's kind of nice. Lots of glancing blow chance here. In general, we stack this up quite a lot. And there's also a lot of crit chance here. Now, you might be asking, why am I running swords? So I mentioned we have katanas. Well, actually, I have 1 katana. I didn't actually get a second one. But on the planner, I'm running katana. And that is also because we have this here, the weapons of choice. So I mentioned it stacks a lot of glancing blow chance for extra survivability, and you get 40% glancing blow when you have 2 swords. This is not a requirement, so if you're fine going a bit squishier with your build, then you can also go for sword and dagger, for example, and then you can get a lot of extra critical strike chance here. This is pretty powerful. And it would allow you to, for example, use some unique items. For example, there's a Smoke Weaver, which is a pretty powerful, unique dagger. And if you get like a legendary potential on that, it's actually a pretty powerful item. And this would allow you to, for example, shift a lot more. You get a lot of dodge. So it's kind of a nice item. And if you get that with some LP, that is an option. But you have to give up the glancing blow chance. And you basically have no hope of getting glancing blow capped. And that is something I really like. So I'm going for the double swords, but sword and dagger is a viable option as well. And now we're here in the Bladedancer tree. So there's also a lot of glancing blow stuff that I'll pick up, especially like after the campaign and stuff. Early on is not that relevant, but you have to kind of invest a few points here to start anyway to even move down here to the right, because there's a lot of stuff we don't really care about. You mostly just pick up this extra movement speed and a bit of damage. There's like the physical damage here. And then, whatever, like a few points here until we get to this part. And on the right, there's a lot of really good passives. So we have this here with the increased attack speed. Then you have the weapons of choice that I mentioned. There's also this Argent Whale that gives you a guaranteed Silver Shroud, which gives you a 100% dodge chance for 1 attack when you drop below 70% health. You can proc once every 15 seconds. So this allows you to like not get too tapped from like big hits, for example. It's kind of nice. Just put 1 point there. It's like a 1-point wonder kind of passive here. There's a bit of leech. And then we have these perfection stacks. So the way those work is that as you attack and hit enemies and don't take hits yourself, you get perfection. And those perfection stacks give you, first of all, increased damage and also more armor and more dodge. So you can get a lot of armor and dodge here. As you can see, if you have 10 perfection stacks, you can get 500 flat armor, 500 flat dodge. And especially as you weave around your way around the map, you can kind of keep up perfection quite easily here, because you also get it from attack. So you put like 1 point here later, you get 2 stacks of perfection per attack as well. So this is it's just a really powerful combo here for defenses, a bit of extra damage. And also we have another huge damage buff here with the critical strike multiplier, 75%. and it reduces your damage dealt by non-crits, but the idea is you never have non-crits, so this is just really strong. And we also have here, you need at least 1 point in this Shadow Master very early because it gives you the +1 maximum shadow, which is important for this combo with the synchronized strike. And then it also has a bunch of extra shadow damage, so I just picked that up and filled it out completely. And lastly, I have a few points here in the Falconer just for extra health and dodge, so I just put it there. You can choose to pick up some other points. This is not really that relevant. So there are some other small things you can pick up here if you want, like for example dex and health and so on. But I just found this to be like the best defensive, and this is really what I cared about because my damage was totally fine already. And that covers pretty much the entire setup. So I had a lot of farms just built. It's cool, like 2-button build. You always do this combo here and then you shift around. Sometimes the shift itself kind of kills enemies already. But you have like this insane burst. You can like one-tap exiled mages. You can, do like a few combos, a boss is dead. And basically nothing ever really lives long with this build until maybe the higher corruption levels. But my setup right now, like I don't really have great gear. I'm still running with some yellow items and my damage is totally fine. So I can probably boost this to, maybe 100, 200k DPS or so at some point if I actually get the stuff that I want. And that is plenty to go to like 500 or even like 1,000 corruption or so and be totally fine. So I just want to show off the setup here because a lot of people have been asking me about it. Lastly, let's talk about the filter real quick. So I made a filter here that kind of works from the start to finish. Just want to go through this real quick, and I'm gonna move my camera so I can see this. So this is the filter I made. It has a bunch of these like level requirements. So you see here, for example, character level dependency from 8 to 100. And, it's, for example, early game rares is like from level 1 to 55 and so on. So I have a bunch of these things so that you can just load up the filter, import it here with, you press on plus and then import it from a paste bin. And you can have exactly this filter here. So it just has basically all of the important stats here, like exalted. I selected the right affixes for that. And we have like rares, for example, if you can turn this off at some point if you feel like you already have enough rares in your stash, so you don't have to keep this up all the time. For example, I made this until level 99, but you can just, if your gear is fine or your merchant skills, you can gear up much more easily. You can turn off some of these filters. But basically, I hide all of the subtypes of, not good enough bases. For example, I only want to see like the GG stuff here later on, for example, from level 70 onwards, once I'm in powered monoliths. And yeah, basically all of the important stats are shown in this filter, including the idols. So I have like a bunch of filters for idols as well, so you can find exactly the stuff that you're looking for. So you can check this out and use this filter for this build, basically from level 1, and have a pretty good time, I think. And that concludes this video guide here. So hope you enjoyed it. This is probably going to be my last build that I'm going to be making for a while for Last Epoch, because I'm kind of in Diablo 4 mood now with the Season 4 updates, and there's also PoE coming. So I'm planning to play that a bit and probably make some videos there. And let's see when we jump back into Last Epoch. I gotta say, lasting Last Epoch for like a full month now, I've accumulated like, I don't know, 400 hours or something, 350 maybe soon. It was a really good time, and especially this build is something that I kept coming back to over the years because it's so much fun with Synchronized Strike and the Shadow Cascade, and it's just really nice and fast build. So hope you enjoyed this, wish you good luck with the build, and I'll see you guys next time.